when Mira Ashworth stumbled through the wrong palace gates during a thunderstorm, soaked and clutching a mysterious summons. The entire Frost Wolf nobility erupted in laughter until their alpha king rose from his ice throne and whispered words that silenced the room. I prayed for this. The fire-touched Omega everyone dismissed as a mistake was about to discover she was the exact answer to an ancient prophecy that could either save the most powerful shifter court in existence or burn it to ash. What happens when the wolf everyone underestimated turns out to be the one thing a cursed kingdom has been waiting centuries to find? The iron gate slammed shut behind Mira with a sound like thunder, trapping her inside the most dangerous place in the kingdom. Rain poured down her face as she stared up at crystal towers that stretched into the dark sky like frozen lightning. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst right out of her chest. This can't be right, she whispered, pulling the wet paper from her coat pocket. The golden seal still glowed, even though water had turned the edges soft. The lunar court invitation was real, but everything about this place screamed that she didn't belong. Mira had never seen buildings made of actual ice before. Back home in the Ember Valley, houses were built from red clay and warm stone. Here, everything sparkled like diamonds, cold and beautiful and sharp enough to cut. Even the air tasted different, clean and bitter, like breathing winter itself. Her boots squelched against smooth marble as she walked toward massive doors carved with wolves made of silver. Each wolf's eyes held tiny blue flames that seemed to watch her move. She'd heard stories about the frost wolves since she was little, but seeing their home made those tales feel small and silly. The Ember Wolves were known for three things: working in the mines, staying out of everyone's way, and having the weakest magic of all the wolf clans. Mira's own fire barely warmed her hands on cold nights. Sometimes she wondered if the magic skipped her completely. Maybe this is all a big mistake, she muttered, but her feet kept moving forward. The invitation had arrived 3 days ago, delivered by a silver bird that dissolved into smoke after she touched it. Her grandmother had nearly fainted when Mira showed her the letter. The High Court never calls our kind, Grandmother had said, her wrinkled hands shaking as she held the invitation. Something big is happening, child. Something that will change everything. Now, standing in front of doors tall enough for giants, Mira wished she'd stayed home. The knocker was shaped like a howling wolf, its mouth open wide enough to swallow her whole hand. She reached up and grabbed it, surprised by how warm the metal felt, despite the freezing air. The sound that came out was nothing like a normal knock. It rang like a bell, deep and musical, echoing through the walls until the whole building seemed to sing. Mira stepped back, her orange eyes wide with worry. The doors opened without anyone touching them. Light spilled out like liquid gold, so bright after the storm that Mira had to cover her eyes. When she could see again, a tall woman stood in the doorway. Her hair was white as fresh snow, her skin pale as moonlight, and her eyes were the cold blue of winter ice. "You're dripping on our floor," the woman said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "I'm sorry, Mira started, but the woman had already turned away. "Follow me. Don't touch anything. Don't speak unless someone asks you a direct question. And try not to look so terrified. It's embarrassing." Mira hurried after her, leaving a trail of water drops on floors so shiny she could see her reflection. The hallways were lined with paintings of important-looking wolves in human form, all with those same ice-blue eyes. Their painted gazes seemed to follow her as she passed. "What's your name?" Mira asked, then immediately regretted speaking when the woman's shoulders went stiff. "Lady Frost," came the cold reply. "And you are the little ember wolf everyone's talking about." Everyone's talking about her? Mira's stomach dropped. She'd hoped to slip in quietly, figure out why she'd been invited, and maybe leave before anyone important noticed her. Now it sounded like the whole court already knew she was coming. They walked through room after room, each more beautiful than the last. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings painted with winter scenes. Furniture carved from single pieces of white wood sat on rugs that looked like frozen waterfalls. Everything was perfect, cold, and absolutely nothing like home. "In here," Lady Frost said, stopping at a door covered in silver symbols. "The others are waiting." The door swung open, and sound hit Mira like a wave. Voices, laughter, the clink of glasses, and underneath it all, a low humming that made her bones vibrate. The great hall was full of the most beautiful people she'd ever seen. They were all tall, elegant, and pale, dressed in clothes that sparkled like starlight. Their conversation stopped the moment they noticed her standing in the doorway, dripping and shivering in her plain brown coat. Then the laughter started. "Is that supposed to be a wolf?" The voice came from somewhere in the crowd, followed by more giggles that spread through the room like ripples on a pond. Mira's face burned hot despite the cold air. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear completely, but her feet seemed stuck to the marble floor. Every pair of eyes in the room was looking at her, and none of them looked friendly. "Someone's servant got lost," said a woman with silver hair piled high on her head. "Should we call for the guards?" "Maybe she's here to clean the floors," another voice suggested. "She's certainly wet enough for the job." The laughter got louder. Mira's hands started to shake, and she clenched them into fists to make it stop. She'd faced bullies before, but never this many at once, and never ones who looked like they could freeze her solid with a glance. "I have an invitation," she said, but her voice came out small and squeaky. Nobody seemed to hear her over their own amusement. "Look at those eyes," someone whispered. "Orange as fire. How? Common." That word hit Mira harder than any insult. Common, it's what everyone back home called the Ember Wolves. Common magic, common blood, common lives that didn't matter to anyone important. She'd spent her whole life trying to prove she was more than that word, but here it was again, following her into the most important place she'd ever been. "I belong here," she said, louder this time. A few people turned to look at her with raised eyebrows, like she'd just claimed she could fly. "You belong in the kitchens, perhaps," said the silver-haired woman. "Though I'm not sure we need any more help with the fires. Your people are good at those, aren't they?" More laughter. Mira felt something hot building in her chest. Not quite anger, but close to it. Her magic, weak as it was, always responded to strong emotions. She could smell smoke starting to rise from her clothes as they dried too quickly. "That's enough." 2 words, spoken quietly, but they cut through the noise like a sword through silk. Every voice in the room stopped at once. Even the servants carrying trays of food froze where they stood. Mira looked up to see where the voice had come from, and her breath caught in her throat. At the far end of the hall sat a throne made of what looked like a single, enormous piece of ice. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, carved with scenes of wolves running through forests and mountains. But it wasn't the throne that made Mira's heart skip a beat. It was the man sitting on it. He was huge, even sitting down. His shoulders were broad enough to block out the carved wolves behind him, and his arms looked strong enough to break trees in half. His hair was black as a midnight sky, and it fell in waves to his shoulders. But it was his eyes that made Mira forget how to breathe. They were silver, like moonlight on water, but shot through with tiny flecks of gold that seemed to move and dance. When those eyes met hers across the crowded room, Mira felt something electric shoot down her spine. It was like being struck by lightning, but instead of pain, there was recognition. He knew her. Somehow, impossibly, this man she'd never met before looked at her like he'd been waiting his whole life for her to walk through those doors. The Alpha King, because that's who he had to be, sitting on that incredible throne, rose slowly to his feet. He was even bigger standing up, tall enough that he had to be over 6.5 feet. His presence filled the room like a storm cloud, heavy and powerful and impossible to ignore. "Your Majesty," Lady Frost said quickly, bowing so low her forehead nearly touched the floor. "We didn't realize you were ready to—" I said enough. His voice was deeper than thunder, but somehow gentle too. He stepped down from his throne, and with each step he took toward Mira, the crowd parted like he was walking through water. Mira couldn't move. She wanted to bow like Lady Frost had, wanted to show respect, wanted to do something other than stand there staring like an idiot, but her body wouldn't obey her brain. All she could do was watch as the most powerful wolf in the kingdom walked straight toward her. He stopped just a few feet away, close enough that she could smell pine trees and winter wind on his clothes, close enough to see that his eyes weren't just silver and gold. There were tiny specks of blue in them too, like stars in a night sky. "What's your name?" he asked, and his voice was so much softer now that only she could hear it. "Mira," she whispered. "Mira Ashworth of the Ember Valley Pack." Something changed in his face when she said her name. His eyes went wide for just a second, like she'd surprised him, and then a slow smile spread across his lips. It was the kind of smile that could melt glaciers. "Mira," he repeated, like he was testing how it sounded. "I've been waiting for you." The hall was so quiet now that Mira could hear her own heartbeat. Everyone was staring at them, but she couldn't bring herself to care. The Alpha King had been waiting for her? That was impossible. She was nobody special, just a girl from a nothing pack with barely any magic at all. "I don't understand," she said. His smile got bigger. "You will." He turned to face the crowd, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the massive room. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Mira Ashworth. She's going to be staying with us for a while." "But, Your Majesty," Lady Frost started to say, "she's just an ember wolf. Surely there's been some mistake." The Alpha King's silver eyes flashed, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Ice crystals began forming on the windows, and everyone took a step back. "There's no mistake," he said, and now his voice carried the full weight of his authority. "Miss Ashworth was invited here for a reason. Anyone who has a problem with that can discuss it with me privately." Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Then he turned back to Mira, and his expression softened completely. The ice on the windows melted, and warmth returned to the air, like spring arriving early. "Welcome to the Lunar Court," he said, and held out his hand to her. Mira stared at that outstretched hand for a long moment. It was pale and strong, with old scars across the knuckles that told stories she wanted to hear. If she took it, there would be no going back. Her life would change forever. But when she looked up into those impossible silver eyes, she realized her life had already changed the moment she walked through those doors. She reached out and placed her small, warm hand in his large, cool one. The moment their skin touched, something extraordinary happened. The ancient leather book slammed shut with a sound like thunder, making everyone in the dusty library jump. Elder Thorne's wrinkled hands shook as he stared at Mira with eyes wide as dinner plates. "Child, do you know what color your wolf's eyes turn when you shift?" Mira felt her stomach drop like a stone. She had never told anyone about the golden flames that danced in her wolf form's gaze, not even her own pack back home. "How did you—" "Because it's written right here in the oldest prophecy our kind has ever known," Thorne whispered. His voice barely louder than a mouse. He opened the book again, pointing to words written in shimmering silver ink. "A wolf whose eyes burn like captured sunlight will either heal the great wound in our kingdom's heart or tear it open so wide that nothing will ever grow again." King Raven stepped closer, his boots echoing on the stone floor. The scent of pine trees and winter wind rolled off him in waves. "Tell her the rest, Thorne. She deserves to know what she's walked into." The old man's face looked like someone had drained all the blood from it. 300 years ago, our kingdom was the most beautiful place in all the Shifter lands. Our magic kept the forests green, the rivers clean, and the people happy. But then, he paused, running his finger along the faded text. Then the Frost King's own brother grew jealous of the crown. Marcus Frostmere made a deal with something dark and hungry from the Shadow Realm. Mira felt goosebumps crawl up her arms like tiny spiders. What kind of deal? He traded half our kingdom's life force for the power to overthrow his brother. The magic worked, but not the way he wanted. Instead of making him king, it created a curse that's been eating away at our lands ever since. Every year, more of our territory turns into dead wasteland. Every year, fewer children are born. Every year, our wolves grow weaker. Through the tall library windows, Mira could see the gardens outside. What she had thought was beautiful before now looked different. The grass wasn't emerald green, it was pale and thin. The trees didn't stand tall and proud, they leaned like old people walking with canes. Even the flowers seemed to droop with exhaustion. That's why you need the fire-touched bloodline, she said slowly, puzzle pieces clicking together in her mind. Fire can burn away curses, or feed them until they become unstoppable. Elder Thorn said grimly. The prophecy has two endings, child. In one, the golden-eyed wolf brings back the spring that's been missing from our lands for centuries. In the other, he swallowed hard. In the other, she accidentally gives the curse so much power that it spreads beyond our borders and destroys every shifter pack on the continent. The room fell so quiet that Mira could hear her own heartbeat drumming in her ears. She looked around at the faces, watching her, some hopeful, some scared, some trying to hide what they were thinking. King Raven's expression was the hardest to read. His silver eyes held so many emotions swirling together like a winter storm. How am I supposed to know which ending comes true? She asked, hating how small her voice sounded. That's the thing about prophecies, said a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Lord Cassius entering the library, his dark cloak flowing behind him like liquid shadow. His smile was sharp as a knife edge. They never tell you the most important part, how to make sure you pick the right path. Something about the way he looked at her made Mira's skin crawl. His scent was all wrong, like flowers that were pretty on the outside but rotting underneath. Her wolf stirred restlessly, warning her that this man was dangerous in ways she couldn't see yet. The council will need to vote on what happens next, Cassius continued, settling into a chair like he owned the whole room. After all, we can't just accept that any random girl who wanders into our court is the answer to our prayers. What if she's a trick sent by our enemies? What if she's not really fire-touched at all? I can prove what I am, Mira said, feeling heat rise in her chest. Can you? Cassius leaned forward, his dark eyes glittering. Because anyone can claim to be special. Anyone can say they're the chosen one from some ancient story. But proving it? He spread his hands wide. That's much harder. Before anyone could stop her, Mira let a tiny bit of her inner fire leak out. Golden flames danced along her fingertips, warm and bright and definitely real. The temperature in the room jumped up like someone had opened an oven door. Several people gasped. Elder Thorn dropped his book. And King Raven smiled for the first time since she'd met him. Not a polite royal smile, but a real one that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. Well, Cassius said slowly, his voice smooth as honey with poison mixed in. I suppose that settles the question of whether you have fire magic, but it doesn't tell us whether you're here to save us or destroy us, does it? The attack came at dawn like a nightmare made of living shadow, pouring over the castle walls faster than anyone could scream a warning. Mira jerked awake in her guest room as alarms rang through the corridors, not bells, but the howling voices of wolves calling their pack to battle. She ran to her window and felt her blood turn to ice water. Creatures that looked like wolves made of thick black smoke were racing across the courtyards below, leaving trails of withered grass and crumbling stone wherever their paws touched. Whenever a guard tried to fight them, the shadow wolves would leap right through weapons and armor like they were made of mist, then solidify just long enough to rake their claws across flesh. The shadow blight has found us, gasped a voice behind her. Mira spun around to see a young servant girl with tears streaming down her face. They're saying it's because of you, because the Fireblood has come to court. The curse knows we might be able to fight it now." Before Mira could ask what she meant, the castle shook like a giant had kicked it. Through the window, she saw something that made her stomach flip upside down. A creature the size of a house was climbing the outer wall, part wolf, part dragon, part living shadow. Its eyes burned with the same sick purple light as the smaller shadow wolves, and everywhere it stepped, the ancient stone cracked and turned black. "Where's the king?" Mira shouted over the noise of battle. "Fighting at the main gate with the other alphas," the girl cried. "But their claws and teeth can't hurt these things. Only magic works, and most of our mages are too weak from the curse to—" A crash from the hallway cut her off. The door to Mira's room exploded inward, and 3 shadow wolves poured through like liquid darkness. The servant girl screamed and pressed herself against the wall. The creatures turned toward her, their mouths opening to show rows of teeth that looked like broken glass. Mira didn't think. She just acted. Fire erupted from her hands in a blazing wall between the monsters and the terrified girl. But this wasn't the small flame she'd shown in the library. This was a roaring inferno that made the air itself seem to burn. The shadow wolves shrieked and dissolved like ice thrown into a furnace. "How did you do that?" the girl whispered, staring at Mira like she'd grown wings. "I don't know," Mira admitted, looking at her own hands in shock. The fire was still there, dancing under her skin like it was alive. I got angry." More screams echoed from outside. Mira ran to the window again and saw that the battle was going badly. The shadow creatures were everywhere now, and more were climbing out of what looked like tears in the air itself, rips in reality that opened onto some horrible place full of purple light and whispering voices. She saw King Raven in his wolf form, a massive creature with fur like silver moonlight, trying to protect a group of children who were running toward the castle's inner keep. But even as she watched, one of the largest shadow beasts lunged at him from behind. Its claws, sharp as swords and twice as long, swept toward his exposed flank. Mira didn't remember jumping out the window. She didn't remember shifting into her wolf form mid-fall, or landing on the courtyard stones in an explosion of golden fire. All she knew was that suddenly she was there, placing herself between the shadow creature and the king, her flames meeting its claws in a shower of sparks that lit up the dawn sky. The monster recoiled, with a shriek that sounded like nails on glass. Up close, Mira could see that it wasn't really solid. It was made of hate and hunger, given shape, held together by magic that smelled like rotting meat. But her fire was hurting it, burning away pieces of its form every time her flames touched its shadowy flesh. "You shouldn't be here," King Raven said, shifting back to human form beside her. His clothes were torn and bloody, but his eyes blazed with something that might have been pride. "These things are too dangerous." "So am I." "Apparently," Mira replied, sending another wave of fire at a shadow wolf that was trying to sneak up on them. "Besides, this is my fault, right? The curse got stronger because I'm here?" "That's not," he started to say, but another crash interrupted him. The giant creature she'd seen climbing the wall had reached the courtyard and was advancing toward them with steps that shook the ground. Each footfall left smoking craters in the stone. "Can your ice magic hurt them?" Mira asked quickly. "A little, but not enough to stop something that size." Mira looked at the monster, then at her hands, then at the king beside her. An idea was forming in her mind, crazy and probably impossible, but maybe their only chance. What if we tried working together? Fire and ice at the same time? That's never been done before. The elements might cancel each other out, or they might make each other stronger, Mira finished. "We won't know unless we try." The giant shadow beast roared and charged toward them, its massive jaws opening wide enough to swallow them both whole. Mira grabbed King Raven's hand and felt his ice-cold power flow into her like liquid starlight. At the same time, she poured her fire magic toward him, feeling it mix with his winter strength, in ways that made her whole body tingle. What came out of their joined hands wasn't fire or ice. It was something completely new. Streams of flame that burned silver white and cold, as frozen lightning. Ice crystals that blazed with inner heat and left trails of golden steam. The magic hit the charging monster square in the chest, and didn't just hurt it, it transformed it, changing Shadow back into ordinary air and broken dreams. The creature dissolved with a sound like wind chimes breaking. All around the courtyard, the other shadow wolves were retreating, fleeing back through their reality tiers like smoke being sucked up a chimney. Within minutes, the attack was over. But as Mira looked around at the damaged castle and the wounded guards, she realized something that made her heart sink into her boots. This hadn't been a random attack. The shadow creatures had been looking for something specific. They'd been testing the castle's defenses, learning about the people inside. "They'll be back," she said quietly, still holding the king's hand. "And next time, they'll be ready for our magic." King Raven nodded grimly, his silver eyes scanning the tears in the castle walls. "Next time, we need to be ready for them." The screaming started at midnight, echoing through the crystal halls like a wounded animal's cry. Mira bolted upright in her borrowed chambers, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sound wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from inside the palace walls, from the room directly above hers. She grabbed her robe and rushed into the hallway, bare feet slapping against cold marble. Other doors were opening too, confused faces peering out. But when she reached the grand staircase, she found Raven already there, his face twisted with pain she'd never seen before. "What's happening?" she whispered, but he couldn't answer. His whole body was shaking, ice crystals forming and melting on his skin in waves. The curse. Elder Thorn appeared beside them, his ancient eyes filled with sorrow. "It strikes him worst during the dark moon. The weight of every soul bound to this court presses down on him like a mountain." Mira watched in horror as Raven collapsed to his knees, his hands clawing at his chest. The screaming was coming from him, not his voice, but something deeper. The very walls seemed to pulse with his agony. "There has to be something I can do," she said, dropping down beside him. When she touched his shoulder, frost burned her palm, but she didn't pull away. "No one can share this burden," Thorn said sadly. "We've tried everything, healers, magic, prayers to the moon goddess herself. Nothing helps." But Mira wasn't listening anymore. Something inside her chest was pulling, like a string connecting her heart to his. Without thinking, she pressed both hands against Raven's face, ignoring the way the cold bit into her skin. "Look at me," she whispered. "Just look at me." His silver eyes found hers, wild with pain. And then something impossible happened. She felt it. The crushing weight he carried, the voices of thousands of wolves calling out their fears and needs and desperate hopes. It poured into her like ice water, stealing her breath. "Mira, no!" Thorn reached for her, but it was too late. The pain should have destroyed her. She was nobody special, just an ember wolf with barely any magic. But instead of breaking under the weight, she felt her fire rise to meet it. Not fighting the cold, but warming it. Not pushing away the voices, but listening to them with the kind of patience she'd learned from years of being ignored herself. "You don't have to carry this alone," she told Raven, her voice steady even as tears froze on her cheeks. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in decades, Raven's screaming stopped. The ice crystals on his skin melted away, replaced by a gentle warmth that made the air around them shimmer like summer heat. "How?" he breathed, his hands covering hers. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I can feel them, all the wolves in your care. They're scared, but they love you. They trust you. And maybe," she paused, the words feeling strange on her tongue, "maybe loving someone means sharing the heavy things too." Elder Thorn stared at them both, his mouth hanging open. "The prophecy spoke of balance," he whispered. "Fire and ice, sorrow and joy, burden and strength. but we always thought it meant one would conquer the other. What if it means something else? Mira asked, still holding Raven's gaze. What if it means becoming stronger together? The next morning brought news that changed everything. A servant burst into the breakfast hall, his face white with terror. "My lord," he gasped, "there are messages from the shadow courts, the mountain packs, even the sea wolves. They're all saying the same thing." "What thing?" Raven demanded, his voice still rough from the night's ordeal. "They felt it," the servant said. "Last night, when your pain stopped, they felt the balance shift. The old magic is waking up, my lord. The barriers between courts are growing thin." Mira's stomach dropped. "Is that bad?" "It could be," Elder Thorn said slowly. "Or it could be the beginning of something wonderful. The courts have been separate for so long, we've forgotten we were once one people. But if the barriers fall too quickly, he didn't need to finish." Everyone knew what happened when different wolf courts clashed without proper preparation. Blood, war, generations of hatred spilling over like a dam bursting. "How long do we have?" Raven asked. "Maybe a week," Thorn said. "Maybe less." That afternoon, Mira found herself in the palace gardens, staring at a flower that shouldn't exist. It was growing right where she and Raven had sat the night before. A strange bloom that seemed to be made of both ice and flame. Its petals were crystal clear, but warm to the touch. Its stem was covered in frost, but the frost glowed with inner fire. "Beautiful, isn't it?" She turned to find Lord Cassius watching her, his usual sneering expression replaced by something harder to read. "I've been thinking about prophecies," he continued, moving closer. "Funny things, prophecies. They always come true, but never the way you expect." "What do you mean?" Mira asked, though something in his tone made her want to step back. "I mean, dear cousin," he said, and his smile was sharp as winter wind, "that maybe you're not here to save us at all. Maybe you're here to destroy us, just like the prophecy says. And maybe that's exactly what some of us have been hoping for." Before she could ask what he meant, he was gone, leaving only the scent of snow and secrets behind. Mira knelt by the impossible flower, her mind racing. She'd been so focused on helping Raven, on finding her place in this strange court, that she'd forgotten the other half of the prophecy. The fire-touched wolf would either save the frost court or destroy it. But what if there was no difference between the two? "Run." The word cut through Mira's dreams like a blade, dragging her back to consciousness. Her room was spinning, the walls groaning like a ship in a storm. "Run, little fire wolf, run before it's too late." She sat up, her heart pounding. The voice had been real. She was sure of it, old and sad and desperate. But when she looked around her chambers, she was alone. Then the screaming started again, but this time it wasn't Raven's voice. It was coming from everywhere at once. Dozens of voices crying out in terror and pain. Mira threw on her clothes and raced toward the sound, her bare feet sliding on floors that were now covered in a thin layer of ice. The great hall was chaos. Wolves, in both human and animal form, were running in every direction, their eyes wide with panic. The beautiful aurora lights that usually danced across the ceiling were flickering like dying candles, and through the massive windows, Mira could see something that made her blood freeze. The sky was falling, not rain or snow, but pieces of the actual sky chunks of star-filled darkness that crashed into the palace grounds like meteors, leaving craters that bled shadow. "What's happening?" she shouted over the noise, grabbing the arm of a passing guard. "The barriers," he gasped. "They're not just thinning, they're breaking apart. The shadow courts are bleeding through, and they're angry. They think we caused this on purpose." Mira's heart sank. The balance she and Raven had found last night hadn't saved anything, it had made everything worse. By sharing his burden, by linking their magic together, they'd created a crack in the ancient walls that kept the courts separate, and now that crack was becoming a chasm. "Where's Raven?" she demanded. "The throne room, trying to contact the other Alpha Kings. But the Shadow Wolves aren't listening. They think this is an attack. Mira ran through corridors that seemed to stretch longer with every step, her ember wolf struggling to surface under the weight of so much fear and chaos. When she finally burst into the throne room, she found Raven standing in a circle of his advisors, his face grim as he spoke into a crystal that pulsed with weak light. "I'm telling you, Alpha Nyx, we had nothing to do with the barrier collapse. Something else is causing this." The crystal went dark. Through the massive windows behind the throne, Mira could see shapes moving in the bleeding sky. Wolves made of living shadow, their eyes burning like red stars. "They're not going to listen," Elder Thorn said quietly. 500 years of separation, and they think we're trying to conquer them. Can you blame them? Lord Cassius stepped out of the shadows near the throne, and Mira gasped. His appearance had changed overnight. His hair was now streaked with silver that moved like liquid metal, and his eyes had gone completely black. "After all, that is exactly what we're doing, Cassius," Raven said, his voice deadly quiet. "What have you done?" "What I had to do," his cousin replied, raising his hands. Dark magic crackled between his fingers, magic that smelled like old graves and broken promises. "What you were too weak to do. The Frost Court has ruled from the shadows for too long. It's time we took our place as the true Alpha Court." "You're working with them," Mira breathed, understanding hitting her like a physical blow. "The Shadow Wolves. You made some kind of deal." Cassius smiled, and when he did, Mira could see that his teeth had become fangs of black glass. "The Shadow Court has been planning this for decades. They need someone on the inside, someone who knows all our weaknesses, and in return," he gestured, and the very air around him began to bend and twist. "They've given me power beyond anything the prophecy promised you." "The barriers aren't breaking by accident," Raven said, pieces clicking into place. "You're tearing them down from the inside." "Very good," Cassius purred. "Though I have to admit, your little display with the fire wolf last night helped tremendously. All that raw emotion, all that unstable magic mixing together, it created the perfect weak spot for us to exploit." Mira felt like she was drowning in cold water. Everything that had felt so right, so hopeful, had been turned into a weapon against the people she'd come to care about. "But here's the truly beautiful part," Cassius continued, his black eyes fixing on her. "The Shadow Wolves don't want to rule the Frost Court. They want to destroy it completely, to make sure no one can challenge their power ever again. And the best way to do that," he raised his hand, and dark magic wrapped around Mira like chains made of nightmares, "is to corrupt the prophesied mate, turn her fire into something poisonous, make her the weapon that burns down everything she was supposed to save." Mira tried to fight, tried to call on her ember flames, but the shadow magic was like trying to breathe underwater. It filled her lungs, her heart, her mind, whispering horrible things about how weak she was, how worthless, how everyone she'd ever loved would be better off if she just disappeared. "Let her go," Raven snarled, ice forming around his hands like claws. "Your fight is with me." "Oh, cousin," Cassius laughed, and the sound was like glass breaking. "My fight was never with you. It was with the entire idea that someone like her could ever be worthy of someone like us." The shadow magic tightened around Mira, and she felt something inside her chest begin to crack. Not her ribs, something deeper. The part of her that had finally learned to hope, to believe she might deserve love and belonging. But just as the darkness closed over her completely, she heard something that made her remember who she really was. Raven was singing, not with his voice, but with his magic. A song of ice and starlight that cut through the shadows like a sword made of pure winter. And in that song, she could hear everything he'd never said out loud. How brave he thought she was. How her laugh made him feel warm for the first time in years. How her stubborn refusal to give up had taught him what real strength looked like. The shadow chains cracked. Just a little, but enough. "You want to know something about firewolves?" Mira said, her voice barely a whisper, but somehow carrying to every corner of the throne room. "We don't burn out. We burn up." The ground shook like an angry giant was stomping his feet. Mira's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears like thunder drums. Cassius stood in front of them, but he didn't look like himself anymore. His eyes were black holes, and shadows crawled all over his skin like living smoke. He was twice as tall as before, with claws that could slice through stone. "You think your little fire can stop me?" Cassius laughed, and his voice sounded like breaking glass. "I have the power of every shadow that ever existed." Mira looked at Raven, who was bleeding from a cut on his face. The ice around his hands was cracking. She could smell his fear, but also something else. Complete trust in her. That scared her more than the monster in front of them. "I don't know how to be a phoenix," she whispered to him. "You don't have to know how," Raven said, grabbing her hand. "You just have to be brave enough to try." The shadows rushed toward them like a black tidal wave. Mira closed her eyes and thought about every time someone told her she wasn't good enough. Every laugh when she fell down. Every whisper about how weak her fire was. Every moment she believed them. But then she thought about Raven's smile when he saw her for the first time. How the frost lilies didn't die when she touched them. How her flames had made the shadow creatures run away screaming. Maybe everyone else was wrong about her. Maybe she was wrong about herself too. "I'm done letting fear pick my choices," Mira said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. Heat exploded from inside her chest. Not the tiny sparks she was used to, but real fire. Big fire. Fire that made the air shimmer and dance. Her wolf form started to change, growing bigger and brighter. Wings made of flames spread from her back. She wasn't just a wolf anymore. She was something new, something powerful. Cassius stopped laughing. "That's impossible. Ember wolves can't do that." "Maybe ember wolves can't," Mira said, feeling power flow through every part of her body. "But I'm not just an ember wolf. I'm me." She flew toward Cassius, her fire wings carrying her faster than she'd ever moved before. When her flames touched his shadows, they didn't fight each other. Instead, something amazing happened. The shadows remembered what they used to be, just regular darkness that helped people sleep and gave trees shade. They stopped being angry and scary. Raven's ice joined with her fire, creating a shield that pushed back all the leftover shadow magic. Where hot met cold, beautiful steam rose up that looked like dancing spirits. The curse that had been hurting the Frost Court for hundreds of years couldn't survive when fire and ice worked together with love instead of fear. Cassius shrunk back to his normal size, looking confused and scared. The black holes in his eyes became regular eyes again, filled with tears. "I just wanted to matter," he said in a tiny voice. "I wanted someone to think I was special." Mira landed in front of him, her fire wings folding against her back. She wasn't angry at him anymore. She understood that feeling of wanting to belong somewhere. "You do matter," she told him, "but not because you're stronger than everyone else. You matter because you're you." The shadow magic that had been controlling him floated away like smoke, and Cassius collapsed. Raven caught him before he hit the ground. Even though Cassius had tried to hurt them, Raven was still gentle with him. That's when Mira knew for sure that she'd picked the right person to love. All around them, the Frost Court was changing. The ice that had been gray and sick was turning crystal clear again. Flowers that hadn't bloomed in years started opening their petals. The aurora lights in the sky got brighter and started showing new colors, orange and gold, mixed in with the usual blue and silver. "The prophecy said I would either save the court or destroy it," Mira said, looking at all the beautiful changes happening around them. "Maybe it was never about choosing one or the other," Raven said, pulling her close. "Maybe it was about creating something totally new." Mira felt different inside, like she'd found a puzzle piece that had been missing her whole life. She wasn't the weak little wolf everyone said she was. She wasn't just the fire-touched girl who didn't fit in anywhere. She was Mira, and that was enough. That was everything. Spring had come to the Frost Court for the first time in 50 years. Mira walked through gardens where ice flowers and fire flowers grew side by side, creating the most beautiful sight anyone had ever seen. The Ember Wolves had built their own section of the palace, and now wolf pups of all different types played together in the courtyards. She wore a crown that Raven had made for her, not because she married him, but because she'd earned it by being brave. It was made of ice that never melted and flames that never went out, twisted together like a braid. When sunlight hit it, it threw rainbow patterns on the walls. "Queen Mira," said a small voice behind her. She turned to see Lily, a little ember wolf pup who'd been too scared to shift for months. "Will you show us the fire flying again?" Mira smiled and knelt down so she was eye level with the pup. "Only if you promise to practice shifting into your wolf form too. Deal?" Lily nodded so hard her whole body wiggled. Mira spread her phoenix wings and flew up into the sky, doing loops and spirals that made all the pups clap and cheer. When she landed, 3 more little wolves had successfully shifted for the first time. They were so excited they kept changing back and forth between human and wolf, their tails wagging like crazy. "She's good with them," said a familiar voice. Elder Thorn walked over, leaning on his walking stick. "The children trust her because she remembers what it felt like to be afraid." "And now?" Mira asked. "Now she teaches them that being different isn't something to hide from." Elder Thorn smiled. "The prophecy spoke of a fire-touched wolf who would change everything. I don't think any of us imagined it would be by showing us that change could be wonderful." That evening, Mira and Raven sat in their favorite spot in the moon garden. The frost lilies had grown into amazing spirals that glowed with inner fire. Other courts were sending messengers, wanting to learn about the magic that happened when opposite elements worked together instead of fighting. "Do you ever think about that first night?" Raven asked, playing with her hair. "When you showed up soaked and scared and absolutely perfect? I think about how I almost turned around and ran away," Mira admitted. "I stood outside these gates for 20 minutes, telling myself I didn't belong here." "What changed your mind?" Mira thought about it. "I realized I was more scared of always wondering what if than I was of people laughing at me." A shooting star streaked across the sky, and they both made wishes. But Mira didn't need to wish for anything anymore. She had everything she'd ever dreamed of, and some things she'd never been brave enough to dream about. "The Ember Wolves want to make you their official leader," Raven told her. "Chief Ashworth has a nice sound to it, and the Frost Court will follow wherever you lead, Your Majesty." Mira laughed. 6 months ago, I was sleeping in a barn because my own pack didn't want me. Now I'm supposed to lead 2 different groups of wolves? "You're not supposed to do anything," Raven said seriously. "You get to choose what you want to do. That's what makes you a real leader." A warm breeze blew through the garden, carrying the scent of both fire flowers and ice flowers. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear young wolves howling together, not in sadness or anger, but in pure joy. The sound made her own wolf spirit sing with happiness. Cassius walked by on his evening patrol. He'd asked to be in charge of security, wanting to protect the place he'd once tried to destroy. When he saw them, he waved and smiled. Real healing took time, but it was happening. "Any regrets?" Raven asked, the same question he asked every night. Mira looked up at the aurora dancing overhead, now showing every color imaginable, instead of just the cold blues and silvers of the past. She thought about the little girl who used to hide her fire because she was ashamed of being different. That girl could never have imagined this life, this love, this home. "Just one," she said, snuggling closer to him. "I wish I could go back and tell that scared little wolf that someday she'd find a place where being different was exactly what made her special." Above them, the stars seemed to twinkle a little brighter, as if the universe itself was smiling at the girl who'd learned that the right place for her had been waiting all along. She just had to be brave enough to walk through the wrong door to find it.